Recording in progress.
Can everybody please find a seat? Hopefully their own seat.
Okay.
Councillor Markowitz, would you lead us in the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Last meeting I said happy August, so I guess I have to say happy September. Welcome back from summer break. So I have to just, please be aware that this is being audio and video recorded. And as the rules tell me, I have to say who is online. So online we have Councilors Downs, Gentile, Kelly, and Wright. And I think most everybody else is in the room. That's very nice. Vice President Lipoff, would you like to give the land use report?
We had a meeting on August 22nd. 259-23, Edward and Lana Lukatsky, request for a special permit to reduce required lot area by 5% at 52 Sharp Road, approved 601. 266-23, Meyer Sarhal, request to allow parking in the front setback at 8991 Craft Street, approved 7-0. And 265-23, Kosher K LLC, request to extend a non-conforming residential use to allow a 3-unit multifamily dwelling to extend non-conforming front, side, and rear setbacks, and to allow up to 36 feet in height, and waivers for parking at 43 Craft Street, approved 701. I'll move the report, but I do have public hearings to assign.
Please go ahead.
These are all for September 19th. 264-23, Mirtha Chang, request to amend site plan associated with special permit 179-15 and parking waivers at 1349 Center Street. 284-23, Kate Shaughnessy, request to further extend 2 non-conforming front setbacks at 147 Cherry Street. 285-23, Dan Hahn, request to extend non-conforming side setback for a detached garage at 75 Royce Road. 286-23, the Second Church in Newton, request to allow a for-profit educational use to waive 19 parking stalls at 60 Highland Street. And finally, 287-23, Washington Place Owner LLC, request to amend special permit 96-17 by increasing the parking waiver from 97 stalls to 172 stalls, and to amend condition 3 of special permit 179-19 at 839-853 Washington Street. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Crossley for the Zoning and Planning Committee.
Thank you, Madam President. Our committee has been very busy. We met both on August 15th and August 21st. We will be meeting this Thursday evening, September 7th, and the coming Tuesday meeting, September 11th. So all on the same items, and all items were held. I have no report.
Thank you very much. Councilor Krinsman for the Programs and Services Committee.
Thank you, Madam President. Programs and Services Committee met on Wednesday, August 16th. The report begins on page 489. Item 252-23, the appointment of Janet Hutig to the Health and Human Services Advisory Council was approved by the committee 7-0. Item 253-22, the appointment of Dr. Carolyn Bernstein to the Health and Human Services Advisory Council was approved by the committee 7-0. Next two items are on hold. The last question is on second call. And with that, I would move the report.
Thank you very much. Councillor Downs is online. Councillor Downs, do you have a public safety and transportation report for us?
Thank you, Madam President. I do not. However, I need to request a suspension of the rules in order to accept a late filed item, number 30723, to increase temporarily the number of sworn firefighters from 193 FTEs to 197 FTEs. That's on page 496.
Thank you. So Councillor Downs needs a suspension of the rules to accept that late filed item. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Thank you very much. Councillor Leary for the Public Facilities Committee.
Good evening, Madam President. There is no report. Public Facilities hasn't been working as hard as the Zoning and Planning Committee. However, I do have 4 public hearings to assign, if I may.
Please go ahead.
These are all going to be for September 6th, our next meeting. Number 301-23, Catherine Adams, attorney for Mark Kempshin LLC, 275 Grove Street, is petitioning for the extension of the city's water main from Washington Street approximately 620 feet north, connecting to the existing main in Dunstan Street, and the petitioner is to pay the entire cost. 302-23, Comcast, Astound, Crown Castle Systems, and Verizon on behalf of Northland Development petition for a grant of location for installing underground telecommunications conduit and infrastructure crossing Needham Street to serve the Newton Northland Development and neighboring community. And 303-23, Cambridge Network Solutions petition for a grant of location to install underground conduit for fiber installation, which includes picking up proposed fiber running along Chestnut Street from a newly installed pole on the north side, and then beneath both east and westbound lanes of Boylston Street, which is Route 9. This will then terminate at a newly placed pole riser just south of Boylston Street. And this fiber conduit will run approximately 252 feet and then run north and south of the utility poles in an aerial fashion. And finally, 304-23, this is Cambridge Network Solutions petitioning for a grant of location to install approximately 190 feet of underground conduit from utility pole 8592 and extend southerly approximately 190 feet to utility pole 8594. And that's it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Grossman for the Finance Committee.
Thank you, Madam President. There's no report this evening, but I do want to remind the Finance Committee and colleagues who are interested in our upcoming docket items that we're meeting twice next week at 2 unusual times. The first is on Monday, September 11th at 7:30. The second is on Thursday, September 14th at 7 p.m. Thank you very much. I think it's Monday. Monday, September 11th?
Yes.
Yes. And Thursday, the 14th. So no report this evening.
Okay, thank you.
Preview of coming attractions. Thank you.
Councillor Rado for Real Property Reuse Committee.
Thank you, Madam President. There's no report this evening.
Thank you very much. So before we do second call, we have a resolution. Before we do the vote on first call, we have a resolution. Councillor Markowitz, would you like to do that?
So let's make sure you can hear me. Oftentimes this mic's a problem for me. So we're going to read a resolution for Paulette Bose, who is the retiring director of the All Newton Music School. Before I read this, I'll just give you a little quick background. I know several of you have had relationships with the school. Councillor Noel worked in development at the school. Councillor Humphrey actually, as a very young man, when he was even younger, attended the school. And I don't know if anyone else here has had their parents, their kids, or themselves in there. I think we've had a few other. Susan's mother and her kids. So there's I've always thought the school is sort of one of the jewels of Newton. There are many, we really are lucky. We've got a lot of very, very great things about Newton. I think about Crystal Lake, for example, as being a treasure. Not everybody likes Crystal Lake, but I think it's a treasure. The Historical Society, some of our organizations, but the school has been there. It's been on Chestnut Street for at least 60 years. It goes back 100 years. It was started by residents of Newton to provide an accessible form of education to people in music who might not have it otherwise, and this just grew through the years. Paulette assumed her responsibilities at a fairly young age. The director before her, Andrew Wolf, a great man, great musical educator, passed away very early, unfortunately, and Paulette took the school over 38 years ago, and it has just grown and continued to be a relevant and important part of the city. So we'll get to some of the accomplishments here, but it truly is, I put the little plug into it. If you want to, I was talking to Councilor Humphrey before, I encourage everyone to go back. If you were a musician at one time, or you still aspire to be a musician, to go back and endeavor in the pleasure that music gives you. So the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the City of Newton, provides this testimonial resolution honoring Paulette Bowes in recognition of her leadership of the All-Newton Music School. Whereas Paulette has been the director of the All-Newton Music School for 38 years and is the longest tenured director in the 100-plus year history of the school. And whereas Paulette Bowes has embraced and promoted through her actions the goals of music for all, and whereas Paulette Bowes has led the All-Newton Music School through a long and substantial capital campaign that provided safety improvements as well as modernized, resilient, and accessible facilities. And whereas Paulette Bowes has assembled one of the finest cadres of professional musicians and teaching professionals who share her passion for teaching students of all ages and abilities. And whereas Paulette Bowes has greatly expanded the musical inclusion program by innovating and successfully implementing diverse musical program for people of all abilities, not only in Newton, but with outreach to neighboring communities. And whereas Paulette Bowes has expanded the school's musical offerings from classical to jazz, rock, the American Songbook, Broadway, and musical theory, and added programs for children in the summer, as well as adult programs like the Chestnut Orchestra. And whereas Paulette Bowes has taught and mentored numerous students, many of whom are now themselves accomplished professional musicians, as well as high-level professionals in other disciplines. And whereas Paulette Bowes has created and promoted numerous concerts and musical extravaganzas for the enjoyment of the community at large, including free faculty concerts, the creation of the Wolf Concert Series, which recognizes the legacy of Andrew Wolf, and whereas Paulette Bowes has established the Musical Scholarship Program, which provides tuition assistance annually, and whereas Paulette Bowes is a fine musician, teacher, and mentor. Now, therefore, be it resolved that Paulette Bowes, upon her retirement as director of the All-Newton Music School, be recognized by the members of the City Council who offer their respect, admiration, and gratitude for her contributions to the residents of the greater Newton community. And this is signed by President Albright, Vice President Lipoff, I've signed it, Councilor Noels, Downs, Wright, Humphrey, Kelly, Krinsman, and Lucas. And before you applaud, I just want to point out that is Paulette Bowes in the front row there, sitting next to her husband, Dennis Alves, who's artistic director for the Boston Pops, and their children and friends, who are all themselves pretty good musicians. So, thank you.
Should I tell her to come up? Yeah, let her say if she wants to say a word. Paulette, if you'd like to come up and get your resolution and have a few words, we'd be happy to have you.
Thank you very much. It's been such a, oh, thank you. Oh, that's good. It's been such a pleasure and to be the director of the music school for all these years. And I've grown up at the school, and I've learned so much about life. I married my husband during the tenure. I raised my 3 children there. They all took lessons at the school. And I just can't tell you what it's like to work with so many volunteers who love what you do and support you. And it's just been the greatest opportunity for me. And I'm ready to retire and just teach and coach. But I would like to give, actually, Chris a big thank you, because he lives right next to me, and I have my windows open when I practice all the time. So he hears hours and hours of mistakes and swear words and everything else, but he still comes to the concert. So thank you, Chris. And thank you all for this. I'm very touched. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And so now I think we can vote on first call.
Counselor Baker. Counselor Bowman.
Aye.
Aye. Counselor Crossley.
Aye.
Counselor Danberg. Counselor Downs.
Aye.
Counselor Gentile.
Aye.
Counselor Greenberg.
Aye.
Counselor Grossman.
Aye.
Counselor Humphrey.
Aye.
Counselor Kalis.
Aye.
Counselor Kelly.
Aye.
Counselor Krinsman.
Aye.
Counselor Laredo.
Aye.
Counselor Leary.
Aye.
Counselor Lipoff.
Aye.
Counselor Lucas.
Aye.
Counselor Maliki.
Aye.
Counselor Markowitz.
Aye.
Counselor Noel.
Aye.
Counselor Norton.
Aye.
Counselor Oliver.
Aye.
Counselor Ryan.
Aye.
Counselor Wright.
Aye.
President Albright.
Aye.
Motion carries 23 yeas, 0 nays, 1 absent.
Thank you very much. And now I would love to have a delegation go and fetch the mayor for the 5-year financial forecast. And Ms. Bowes and company, we'd love to have you stay for the whole meeting, but when we go to invite the mayor, you feel free to leave if that's what you like to do. So Councilor Laredo, would you lead the delegation with Councilor Oliver and Councilor Greenberg and Councilor Maliki? Okay. That might be a better view. I don't. Or Pam Wright's spot. Or Pam's, yeah. Okay.
Oh, good to see you. Good evening, everybody. How are you? Good to be here. To my colleagues in government, City Council President Susan Albright, Vice President Rick Lipoff,
To President Emeritus Lyle Baker and all the city councilors, I'm so glad to be with you on the first day of school, and I am mightily tempted to say Happy New Year. I'm joining you tonight to deliver our long-range financial plan and 5-year financial forecast 6 weeks earlier than usual, and I'm grateful to President Albright for suggesting this schedule as you, the city councilor, are taking up in the next few weeks a proposal from me that has important positive impact on the finances of the Newton Public Schools. More on that in a few minutes. This long-range financial plan and 5-year financial forecast for the city of Newton comes after a turbulent 3.5 years. The economy shut down in March 2020 as the COVID-19 pandemic engulfed us. The needs of our students, residents, and businesses skyrocketed as our revenues weakened. With the support of one-time federal and state funding, combined with belt tightening by us in areas such as funding our pensions, we together supported the people who live, work, and go to school in Newton while balancing our budgets. I'm reassured that now in September 2023, this financial plan and forecast show steady, predictable, and sustainable growth, allowing us to provide steady, predictable, and sustainable school and city operations. We have every reason to believe that we will retain the highest credit rating possible, a AAA, a sign that our finances and operations are well managed and that we are appropriately balancing our current needs and future obligations. The long-range financial plan and 5-year financial forecast are comprehensive, forward-looking, financially stable, and fiscally disciplined. Our plan protects reserves. Our plan increases the funding ratios for both types of our long-term retiree obligations, pensions, and health care. In fact, the plan does more, clearing the deck on our pension liability 8 years from now. Our debt load remains stable. No financial cliff looms. Low and manageable budget gaps are projected. For city and school operations, we will have to continue to carefully manage every taxpayer dollar. While there is growth in each subsequent budget, the growth is steady and stable rather than large and increasing exponentially. We continue to need to operate within a 2.5% increase in property taxes as required by Proposition 2.5, along with the additional growth in taxes from new residential or commercial development. The amount of so-called new growth and redevelopment matters. The 2.5% from the Prop 2.5 plus the percent of new growth is the key determinant of how much revenue growth the city will have. In Newton, our new growth is modest and declining. Of all the cities and towns in Middlesex County, Newton has had the 4th lowest average new growth since 2005. In fiscal year 2023, last year, Newton's percent increase in new growth value was lower than the year before and reached the lowest percent increase in 10 years, just 1.44%. In our financial forecast, we project another decrease this fiscal year to 1.33%. As an aside, this relates to the important village center zoning work the City Council is undertaking, rezoning for village centers that Newton needs to thrive. This financial plan supports our schools, which are at the heart of Newton's values and justifiably receive the vast majority of our funding. The plan allows for the MPS budget to grow every year and grow at a rate slightly higher than the rest of our city departments as a whole. This is fitting and proper. The long-range financial plan simultaneously provides funding for excellence in public safety, social and health services, library and cultural services, parks and recreation opportunities, and senior services. The financial plan is crafted so we can make continued investments in our roads, in climate initiatives, and in accessibility, including improving safety for pedestrians and bicyclists, as well as safety for residents and businesses as we face more extreme heat and cold, rain and snow. This financial plan also allows for the many links people need to food, housing, and mental health resources. This year's 5-year financial forecast, long-range financial plan, and 5-year capital improvement plan come forward less than a year after Newton voters considered a tax override proposal. The community supported the 2 debt exclusion questions, so we're moving forward with the Countryside and Franklin Elementary School building projects. Voters, on the other hand, rejected the operating override. The day after the election, I immediately looked for ways within our current revenue structure to provide additional financial support for the Newton Public Schools. NPS is by far our largest department and by far our largest expenditure line item. Although enrollments have declined and are expected to continue to do so, we recognize that the investments needed to support each and every one of our students as they strive to reach their own potential has increased. During our FY 2024 budget process this past April and May, we proposed, several measures which the City Council approved. These measures created ongoing sustainable funding to bolster NPS operations and solidified a viable financial pathway forward. I am grateful to the City Council for their support of students and the Newton Public Schools. However, as a package, these financial measures did not provide ongoing funding at the level that the operating override would have. New initiatives, increased support for current initiatives, and continuing the current level of services were all constrained for MPS without that additional funding. I'm pleased that now 2 recent financial developments are enabling me to propose a significant initiative, an Operations Booster Stabilization Fund. This stabilization fund will provide additional financial support for the operations of the Newton Public Schools for the next 8 years and strengthen the overall financial health of the city. While this funding strategy includes a number of intersecting pieces in its mechanics, and I grant you they are all a bit arcane, the bottom line is that the Operations Booster Stabilization Fund helps our students, our residents, and our employees. How? This plan transforms a one-time surplus into ongoing funding for school and city operating needs for the next 8 years through fiscal year 2032. FY32 is the year that we will fully fund our significant pension liability according to the funding schedule set by Newton's Retirement Board. Having additional ongoing financial support over these 8 years is critical, alleviating pressure on city and school operations from the growing payments to fund our pension liability. Once we fund that pension liability, we free up a lot of funding, over $50 million, to use for ongoing operations and one last significant liability, our retiree health care obligations, also known as OPEB. So what's the impact of this stabilization fund strategy? Ongoing sustainable support for operations, no looming fiscal cliff, fully tackling a huge financial albatross, and an increase in the allocation to the Newton Public Schools by the City Council for the next 8 fiscal years, FY25 through FY32. This is an increase annually by 20 basis points to approximately 3.7%. That means more than $460,000 next year alone. At the same time, this plan also allows the City Council to appropriate at least a 3.45% increase to the municipal department budgets. Further, this plan recognizes the importance of investment in our capital infrastructure. We move forward with our major building projects, including Gath Pool, New Cal, Lincoln Elliott, and Horace Mann. Countryside and Franklin also advanced with the debt exclusion override funding. We are carefully monitoring the impact of current high interest rates combined with rising construction costs. And together, we will determine if our capital investments have to stretch out over more years so that our funding matches our costs. Some have suggested that we take the full amount of the one-time overlay surplus from back taxes paid by Eversource and put it directly into operating our school and/or city programs and services. But one-time funds are just that, one-time funds. They end, they run out. When the funding ends, current services that depend on that funding cannot continue. Employees that were paid with these funds must be laid off. This is often called a fiscal cliff. The overlay surplus is a one-time cash infusion. But by putting these one-time monies into a stabilization fund that matches the exact number of years of a particular liability, in our case, our pension system funding, we are ensuring that we will have ongoing funds when the Operations Booster Stabilization Fund closes down 8 years from now. In closing, a well-managed, fiscally sound City of Newton is essential so that we can provide exceptional teaching and learning to over 11,000 students, deliver top-notch city programs and services to our residents, nonprofits, and businesses, and make important updates to our infrastructure. For the city's finances to remain sustainable, we must remain steadfast in our determination to balance the annual operating budget that provides programs and services our residents need and want, while addressing infrastructure needs, offering fair wages and benefits, fully funding all liabilities from debt service to pensions to retiree health care, and developing and maintaining an appropriate level of reserves for economic down cycles, dramatic weather events, and other unpredictable lightning bolts. I am grateful to the teachers who began the new school year this morning, to our police officers, firefighters, and dispatchers who help us 24/7, to our DPW and Parks, Rec, and Culture crews who also serve as first responders, and to so many other valued employees, from librarians to social workers and IT professionals to accountants. Tonight, I want to thank in particular Chief Financial Officer Maureen Lemieux for her financial wisdom. The two of us, along with COO Jonathan Yo, look forward to joining you in 2 weeks to present the capital improvement plan. In between, we're right here. If you want to talk or have a question, please reach out. And with that, and with President Albright's permission, I pass the microphone to Maureen Lemieux.
Good evening, everyone. Mayor Fuller, President Albright, Vice President Lipoff, President Emeritus Baker, to all of you counselors who are joining us can you hear me? To all of you counselors joining us here in the chamber, to counselors who are participating through Zoom, and to anyone else who may be watching this as interested residents in the city. It is always a pleasure to come before you to walk through our 5-year financial plan and our long-range forecast. As the mayor said, she mentioned lightning bolts. We have been through turbulent times. I might be experiencing one right now. Try it again. Okay. All right. So we have certainly been through turbulent times over the past 3.5 years. Every time I think that the pandemic is almost over, every year for the last decade, when we think things are going to get a little easier, they just don't seem to. We've had the pandemic that we've dealt with. We have inflation now looming overhead. We have mental health issues from all of those who have struggled during the pandemic especially. We have climate change, which is perhaps the greatest threat that we have before us. We have interest rates that are rising, and we have retiree funding funding for retiree benefits. We have so many issues that are at our doorstep, it seems. And so it is incredibly important that we have this conversation every fall, that we talk about what does our future over the next 5 years really look like. Every time that I've given this address to you, I say to you, the place that I begin is with revenue. We have to begin with revenue. Proposition 2.5 is a revenue cap. And so it is incredibly important that we understand our constraints within it. The city of Newton is extremely fortunate in a way that 83% of our income comes from property taxes. There have certainly been times over the years when I've said that it has been a bit of a hindrance because we have known that 83% of our revenue could only increase by 2.5, but yet when the pandemic hit, the people in the city of Newton pay their taxes, and most of our revenue comes from property taxes. And so where other communities may have been really impacted negatively if they had large commercial bases, we were actually fortunate because our cash collections stayed where they needed to be. In addition to 83% of our revenues coming from property taxes, 7% comes from 2 state funding sources. Chapter 70 Education Aid, which is, of course, our largest other revenue stream, and unrestricted general government aid. Those 2 sources make up 7% of our total funding. So 90% of our total funding is virtually cast in concrete for years to come. The other 10% is the revenue that can potentially fluctuate. Within that, so in the total 17%, if you think about property tax revenue being 83, the first 7% is Chapter 70 and unrestricted aid. The other 10% is made up of items such as excise taxes, building permits, miscellaneous fees, parking meter revenues, rooms and meals taxes, and the like. And so those are the areas that we really look at specifically when we're preparing our forecast. To talk about where we are with our revenues as we have more or less come out of the pandemic, I would say to you that our revenues are certainly rebounding. Carol, I seem to have stopped again. I think if you touch it, it might impact me. Okay. All right. Our Chapter 70 Education Aid throughout the pandemic remained an increasing source of funding. Our unrestricted government aid also increased throughout the pandemic, with the exception of fiscal 21, where it was level funded. Our excise taxes fell in the very beginning with the pandemic, but have really gotten back on track and are now back to our pre-pandemic levels. And our inspectional services income, permit revenues, have also returned to pre-pandemic revenues. Our rooms tax, although I have a green arrow here, our rooms tax are about $430,000 less than they were pre-pandemic. The reason I consider it to be green is that, as you all know, the Indigo Hotel closed right about the time that the pandemic started. So we will never see that revenue source again, but the other 2 hotels, we certainly are once again on track with their revenue. Our meals tax revenue in '23 was higher than I believe it's ever been in the city, and so that was certainly encouraging. However, parking ticket revenues and parking meter revenues have still not come back to where they were pre-pandemic. If you look between rooms tax, parking tickets, and parking meters, it's more than $1 million that still has not returned since the pandemic hit. The one winner in all of this, as far as our revenue streams, has been interest income. This year, in fiscal '23, we amassed more than $9 million of interest income. We had budgeted just about $700,000, so 8.4 of that will drop to the free cash number that will be declared within the next month or so. If you take a look back, this is 15 years worth of data that's here on this chart. I dare say that in the last 8, 9, or 10 years, with all of those years combined, we didn't take in as much interest income as we did this past year. This is certainly exciting from a cash perspective, but I can assure you it isn't something that we can count on when we are budgeting. You will see in our forecast, I certainly have increased the projection for interest income in fiscal '25 in our forecast, but we need to be extremely careful not to plan on seeing these numbers with the years in the future. So what else is important when we are doing our revenue projections? The most important calculation we do is revenue that we expect from new growth and redevelopment. As the mayor mentioned, our new growth numbers have been falling. We hit a peak of 1.8% of our levy limit, which was almost $6.5 million a few years ago. We are now projecting this year that we will only have a 1.33% increase as compared to our levy limit, and we're projecting that that number will only be 5.2 million. Makes a huge difference. That is absolutely the most important number whenever we do these projections. Why is it so important? Well, this chart shows for the last 30 years all of the fluctuations. We've had 10-year periods where we've been around 1.25, 1.28. The last 10 years have been really the best years in the city's, even more than recent history, I would say. Our current projection for this year, though, is 1.33%. We are seeing a decline. We have had a decline now for 3 consecutive years, and so this is certainly an issue that we need to watch very carefully. Those numbers, our 10-year periods have fluctuated between an average increase of 1.05% all the way as high as an average increase of 1.67. It may not sound like a lot, but by the time we get to fiscal 34, the difference between those revenue streams is $37 million per year. And so it is a huge difference. Now, do we think that we will either be at the lowest end of that or at the highest end? Unfortunately, not for the highest end. And so we are projecting that we will land somewhere in the middle, somewhere in the 1.25 to 1.3% range. If we come out with higher new growth, obviously we will be very excited. As a precursor to understanding the new growth numbers, we every month watch our ISD building permit revenues to understand what's being permitted in the city and where do we think our revenues will be going. Of note, Riverside, as you all know, has stalled, and Northland is progressing at a slower pace than was originally anticipated. Those two facts are very much a part of this forecast. However, I want to make sure that everyone understands and knows that the larger driver of our new growth is residential construction. And even more so than residential construction as far as teardowns. We have about an average of 100 teardowns a year. The bathroom renovations, kitchen renovations, porches or decks, all of those things are really the bread and butter, if you will, of our new growth. Those certainly, again, can be impacted by high construction costs right now, rising interest rates if people are going to get a home equity loan, and so every aspect of this we need to really watch carefully, but we're certainly doing that. Just for your information, we thought it would be important for people to understand how we fare as compared to our neighbors. Newton is the green line, if you can see it, hovering a little bit above 1.5% for our new growth numbers. Somerville has been having incredible new growth, and Waltham had been experiencing incredible new growth, but they have certainly seen a decline in the last 2 years. That enables a community, that kind of new growth enables a community to do so many things that we just can't possibly expect to do, all the way from capital projects, road paving, collective bargaining agreements, how we settle things. We have a fairly stable, even though it fluctuates, a fairly stable increase each year from our new growth. And we have to understand that number, and we certainly can't expect to ever see numbers like Somerville has been experiencing over the last few years. Now let's talk about the Newton Public Schools for a minute. As the mayor mentioned, and as you all know, when the override question failed last March, we got to work right away the following day trying to figure out what we could put in place to help boost the appropriations to the Newton Public Schools. As you know, with your support, we increased the appropriation annually now on an annual basis by $600,000 by choosing to use $10 million of our free cash to pay toward the Lincoln Elliott School. We provided a bridge grant to them for the $1.4 million for the out-of-district student placements. We came to you as a council and utilized free cash for some large legal settlements that they had. We worked with the Newton Retirement Board to increase the COLAs, to extend our full funding date for the pension system by a year, and very importantly, when it comes to the schools, to allow us to move forward with the Horace Mann addition and renovation, which had been part of the operating override. We also restructured our health insurance plans, and within that restructuring, Newton Public Schools decreased their spending this year by $650,000 and will decrease further spending next year by another $325,000. We transferred $3.2 million that had been their OPEB appropriation. We will now carry that number within the city budget. That number most probably will increase by more than the 3.5% or 3.7% allocation increase that they receive, and so we will be the ones who bear the risk of that increase. We used $410,000 of ARPA funding. The school committee wanted to make sure that they maintained their class sizes and felt the need to reduce some of their facility maintenance projects, and so we gave them the funds to supplement that decision. And along the way, we worked as hard as we could to preserve the progress that we have made in all of our municipal departments while we were sustaining funding for the Newton Public Schools. The Newton Public Schools, this is an incredibly important slide. Since October of 2019, they are projecting that they will be starting this year with 1,342 fewer students than they had in 2019. As you can see, they peaked in October of 2017, started a very slight decline as we were projecting and expecting. Of course, then October of 2020 was when we were deep in the throes of the pandemic, and clearly their enrollment numbers have not come back. So this is clearly something that the Newton Public Schools will be working through. The Newton NPS budget is now at $268.7 million. I just want to make a note that, everyone remind yourselves that that number is actually 3.2 million less than it would have been because, as I said a moment ago, we took that 3.2 million out of their budget. So their budget was actually a 3.73% increase this year, but for the fact that we moved that 3.2 million out. Debt service. This year, in our budget, fiscal '24, we will spend just under $25.3 million in principal and interest payments for all of our bonded projects. In the spring of '23, when we were preparing our budget this past spring, we expected our capital projects, we expected that we would need about $194 million worth of bonding for our capital projects. Our general fund projects, New Cal, Lincoln Elliott, and Horace Mann, as well as our debt excluded projects, Countryside and Franklin. And so if you can see, I color code everything. The yellow bars on the chart are for the projects that are funded by the general fund. The green bars are for the two projects that are funded with the debt exclusion. Countryside, as I think you all know, we are expecting about a $20 million reimbursement, if you will, from the state, from the Massachusetts School Building Authority, and so we expect to be bonding in the $40 million range for Countryside, and that's why our number is $194 million. However, rising construction costs and high interest rates may very well impact these numbers. And so again, we need to make sure that we understand the sensitivity of the construction costs as well as the interest rates when it comes to these projects. So as I said, in the spring of 2023, we were projecting $194 million. Just so that everyone knows conceptually, 0.5% in interest rates. If we have to borrow at 4.5%, that $194 million, it will cost us $11.8 million per year for the debt service on those 5 projects. If our borrowing costs are 4%, it goes down to 11.1. If we are able to borrow at 3.5, we go to 10.4 million per year. So you can see there's a $1.4 million swing in a 1% change in the interest rates. Additionally, though, the other worry that we have is that our project costs will increase. If they increase by 10%, we will end up spending about $213 million. If the overall increase is 15%, it will cost us about $223 million. So these I did strictly at 4%. If we spend $194 at 4%, and you can see it obviously agrees with the other chart, it would be 11.1. However, if those costs escalate by 10% and we have to borrow $213 million at 4%, we go up to 12.2, and then if we have to borrow 15% more, 223, we're up to 12.8. So there is, between these numbers, there's a $2.4 million annual swing, if you will, at the numbers that we are looking at. We clearly are watching everything carefully. We will be consulting with our financial advisor each year as we are looking to bond these projects. We will want to understand what the interest rate trends are. We may end up selling bands, which is a bond anticipation note, where we only pay the interest for the first year if we think that rates will be declining in the following year. So we have certainly a couple of tools in our tool belt, if you will, to try to manage our way through this, but this is certainly, yet again, one of those lightning bolts. OPEB, our OPEB liability, other post-employment benefits or retiree health. Our liability is currently a little over $400 million. We have been working very hard, as you all know, to set aside to have a true revenue, a funding stream for OPEB. We really began in earnest in fiscal '24. We started by taking everyone who was newly signed up for our health insurance. Pardon? Oh, I'm sorry. Fiscal year 2014. We started taking everyone who was newly insured as of July 1st of 2012. Back in the day, in 2014, you can see that we only set aside 2.5% of what their salaries were, and we had about 400 people who we ended up covering in that year. We have now reached a point where we are setting aside 3.75% of their salaries, and we have 1,466 people who we are now applying this number to. We knew when we put this plan together that we would really see exponential increases in this funding stream. And Carol, not that I want you to move this, and so unfortunately people can't quite see this, but what you'll see is when you look at this in your books, we're at a point of diminishing returns. That's what I wanted to use earlier, where now, because we have 1,466 people, and because we have been doing this now for 11 or 12 years, we have people who will either resign or even retire from the city who we have been applying this OPEB value to. And so we might be very often replacing them with someone, so when the new person comes in, we've already been applying this. So there'll be a bit of a diminishing return on the numbers of people, how fast it will grow, but it will certainly continue to grow. This is obviously our plan until 2032, when we hope to have our pensions fully funded. At the moment, we have, with this strategy, we now have $30 million in our OPEB trust. So it certainly has grown considerably. And as I mentioned, in 2032, hopefully when the pension costs are the dark lines on this graph. The yellow is OPEB. We will hopefully really, once we have our pensions funded, turn our sights on OPEB and hopefully have OPEB funded by around 2045. Okay, our unfunded pension liability is currently $307 million. One of the things that we did last spring that was so important, with your help, with the help of the retirement board, we changed our funding schedule from a schedule that increased by 9.6%, the appropriation for pensions each year, to a schedule that would increase by 6.6%. The dark lines here are at 9.6%. The green lines are at a 6.6% growth rate. We knew, because our performance of our investments for calendar year 22 was a significant negative number, as was true for, I'm sure, all of us in our own personal lives. That significantly impacted our funding schedule and would have caused us, even if we stayed on our 9.6% increase track, we would have had to put money into pensions in the year 2031. We would not have reached full funding in 2030. I think this is a fact that you probably all know only too well. And so what we did was we went to the retirement board. We asked to move it to 2032. We certainly increased the COLAs for retirees. We added Horace Mann, the funding for Horace Mann, and we were able to reduce our projected increase in funding by 3% each year. That number grows substantially. So a year ago, when we did this presentation for you, by 2030, we were expecting to be appropriating $73 million for pensions. As of April, when we put the budget together, we were then forecasting that in 2030, we would need $60 million. So it's a big savings in 2030, a $13 million savings, a significant savings in each of the years of 24 through 2030. But as you can see on here, because we have pushed the funding schedule out by those 2 years, the green line, which is what we will need to fund for 2031 and 2032, is obviously substantially larger than it would have been. So now, as we stand here before you, the approved funding schedule for our pension system is a 6.6% annual increase. We are in 2024, which is the yellow bar. By the time we get to 2032, we do not need, or hopefully will not need, what the full value would be at a 6.6% increase. However, in our forecast, we are going to continue to forecast that we would need to at least level fund the pensions. We've provided ourselves a buffer so that if we have years where we do not make the 6.9% interest over the next few years, that we have in our forecast that we are planning on potentially having to use more money than what's actually in the funding schedule that the actuary prepared for us for pensions. You can see on this chart that we are now at 61.9% funded. So our funding ratio has certainly increased. However, this chart compares us to many of our neighbors. The only one of the surrounding communities that we compare ourselves to that has a lower funding ratio than we do is Waltham, who is at 61.5. You may notice that a lot of these, the dates on these are different. Communities, I think perhaps because of COVID, communities have been slower to get they're off of the PERAC site. So, you know, we will certainly be watching this, and hopefully when we're putting the budget together in the spring, we will have more up-to-date numbers for some of these communities. But this is incredibly important for anyone who thinks that we should go out longer and not stay on our funding schedule. It is incredibly important that we do, because we are behind virtually everyone else around us. Our pathway forward, with all of this information, how do we make all of this work? first thing that happened, as you all certainly know at this point, in mid-August, because Eversource withdrew 9 of their 11 years' worth of assessment challenges, they did that at the end of June. By mid-August, our Board of Assessors was able to declare $20.5 million as overlay surplus. Additionally, we have an account that was appellate tax board interest. Most of that money, $4.6 million of that, is money that Eversource had paid to us last year when we received the money from them. And the rest of the balance really is what we would have owed them just for a year if they won their cases against us. And so we find ourselves in a position where we have $26 million. Hence, our proposal to you for the Operations Booster Fund for $26 million. The reason that, one of the reasons, perhaps one of the strongest reasons why we are coming to you proposing the entire $26 million is because our free cash, although not yet certified, it has not even been sent to the Department of Revenue yet, but we are projecting that we will have somewhere between $21 and $23 million this year of declared free cash. On any given year, we need the first $5, $6, $7, $8 million for things like the next year's budget, the potential for a snowy winter. We've had 2 years in the past 7 or 8 years where we've spent $7.5 million on snow removal. We only have $4.9 million in our budget. And so we have different things, the different legal settlements that I mentioned. We have different things, as you know, that we come to you during the course of every year. Paving, we never have money in our budget enough to do all the paving that we know we need to do. So we know what some of our standard costs always are for free cash, but we also know that this is a significant number, and we should be able to address all of our other one-time needs that we would be coming to you with over the course of the next year. Where is that free cash coming from? I want to make sure that you all understand that also. I think you all may know we did not spend all of last year's free cash. We carried forward about $5.4 million, so that has just rolled forward. That money, we purposely didn't spend it last year. It's for retroactive wages, it's for different legal settlements, it's for different expenditures that we absolutely believe are in our future, but it's a matter of timing. And so that money, we did not need it last year, but we still will need it at some point in time. And then, of course, our interest income, I just want to remind you what this slide looks like. That $8.4 million is going to fall to free cash. So if we end up with about $22 million in free cash, almost $14 million of that is these two line items. So it doesn't really mean that otherwise that we had a huge free cash. As we are getting closer to full funding of pensions and trying to do all of the things that we do, we are budgeting tighter and tighter and tighter each year. We need free cash until we ever get our budgets to really fund 100% of what our expenditures are. So this is $22 million, though, is certainly a healthy number. What is the purpose of this Booster Stabilization Fund? The first purpose is, it really has two purposes: to boost funding for the Newton Public Schools operations and to relieve pressure on our city finances while we are funding our pension system. I think this chart, it's obviously too detailed and too small to go through now, but you all have received this. It's also included back in your forecast that you will receive tonight. It details how we expect to use this fund. But the two most important things, if you walk away not remembering anything else from this presentation, the two most important slides are coming up. What is it that we want to do? We want to, if you look at fiscal 30, because I think that's the most important year in this plan, we have already changed the funding schedule from needing $73.4 million in fiscal 2030 to needing about $60 million in 2030 with our 6.6% increase. Approval of this plan that we have will allow us to only have to increase our appropriation up to $55.3 million, so saving us another $5.5 million in fiscal 30, and then if you look at fiscals 31 and 32, those numbers do not grow by much at all. And so it significantly helps our ability to make sure that we are taking care of our operational needs while we are staying exactly on the funding schedule for our pensions. And so this is the same chart that you've seen many times. The difference is if you look at the little light blue part, as we move forward from fiscal 25 forward, the light blue part is the contribution from the Booster Stabilization Fund, which we intend to deplete by 2032. We will invest those funds safely, and we will get as much money as we can in a very safe environment. If we end up earning more interest than we are forecasting at the moment, we will utilize those funds and we will decrease that 5% increase in the appropriation to perhaps 4.8 or 4.9, whatever we can do. And then in 2032, you see that pension buffer that stays there. So in your budget book, the pension allocation in the budget book will look exactly the same. What we are proposing that we do is fund it by 5% of that increase through our taxes and our regular general fund revenues, and 1.6 of that increase from this capital stabilization, the Operations Booster Stabilization Fund. The reason this works and why we were not open to a stabilization fund that was funding debt service is because debt service we incur for 30 years. We would have had to grow into that debt service somehow or create a financial cliff. This expenditure goes away at the end of 2032, and so it is the perfect opportunity for us to use this type of a vehicle to make sure that we're still able to provide for the operations that we need to as a city while we are still funding our pension system. So the chart before this is the one that was so critical. The other one that is so critical is what will we do with this money? When we talk about how we are going to boost things, as we have mentioned to you, it is our intent to take 70% of that savings. By 2032, it will be $5.5 million more that will be in the school department budget than they otherwise would have had if we could only increase their budget by 3.5% over the course of the next 8 years. In 2033, the expectation would be that we would go back to a 3.5% annual increase for them, but that we would take this $5.5 million and build it into their base at that point in time. And so we all know the schools, we have all different terms, whether they are the bedrock value of the community. Our schools are so important. The schools are why so many people move here. It is such a pillar of this community that making sure that we're providing appropriate resources as they move forward is incredibly important. And so, what I will leave you with is everyone in this chamber works very hard for the people of this city. And so sometimes we need to really just take a step back and think about why are we all doing this? We're doing it to make sure that we're providing academic excellence, that we're keeping Newton safe, that we're digging out and cleaning up from weather events throughout the city, that we're maintaining our roads, that we're plowing our snow, that we're taking care of solid waste, that we're preserving our neighborhoods and creating affordable housing, that we're providing excellent city services, that we're funding our long-term liabilities, namely pensions and OPEB, that we are, I have no idea what we're doing, but we're doing something there, that we are settling our union contracts, providing fair employee compensation and benefits, that we are creating an accessible and supportive city, that we're providing for arts, culture, and community life, that we are protecting our parks, recreation, and open space, that we are prepared for economic downturns and interest rate spikes, that we are promoting village centers and commercial corridors, that we are addressing climate change and sustaining our environment. And our pledge as an administration, as a mayor, as part of her administration, is that we will do all of this while maintaining financial sustainability. With that, Madam President, I turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much. And could the delegation escort the mayor and her staff? Thank you. No, I'm good, thanks. That was my phone. It still works. You want to take a stretch for a few minutes while we're waiting for the delegation to return? Okay, everyone, I think we can get started again. Okay. Item 205-23 was chartered by Councilor Gentile at the last meeting. He is not with us tonight, or I don't know if he's here or not, actually, but he's asked Councilor Markowitz to handle this for him. So Councilor Markowitz, you're on.
Thank you, Madam President. So I'll just give you a quick, I think what we're asking for is just for a recommit back to ZAP. And the rationale for this, so what is today? Tuesday. I guess it was last Friday, Councilor Gentile and I met with the petitioner and the petitioner's attorney. We actually went to the site, we walked through the building, we saw the adjacent parcel, which is part of this whole project. And at that time, it was suggested that there be a neighborhood meeting. Councilor Krinsman couldn't make it. He was invited, but he was working his other job, other less important job, less impactful job. Sorry, Josh. Well, you know, Josh dishes it out, so he has to get it back to a little bit, and I know he takes it well. But seriously, the petitioner and the petitioner's attorney all thought it made sense to have a neighborhood meeting. We've heard a lot about this. There are still some unanswered questions, and I'll tell you, just as an aside, when I was over there, I don't know if you're familiar with this piece of Charles Street, it was parked up. I couldn't believe it. I actually had to put my car in front of the building, which isn't a problem since the building's not, is right now just being used for storage. So I think there's a number of questions that really probably would be beyond trying to handle here tonight with all of us at this hour or even at another time. I just think it makes sense to go, you know, back to committee, let the neighborhood meeting happen before that, get that input. If they want to make any public comment at that time, take it, and then you can re-vote it and send it back. But it just seems like the best process to deal with this, because again, there is still open stuff there. And you know, what we did here, and the reason we met with the petitioner's attorney and the petitioner was after this happened, we heard from a number of people living on Charles Street saying they didn't know about this, it wasn't noticed. I mean, I was noticed somehow, but you know, who knows how far up the street it was, but there clearly is a neighborhood question about this. And I'll also remind you that this is very unusual. I don't know, you know, a number of us have served on land use. In 6 years of doing this, I can't really recall. I'm sure we had one or two of these, but a zone change without an accompanying special permit is very unusual, and that's what started the whole questioning around this. In other words, what is the real intention of these parcels? So I think there's just a little more work to be done here, and I think having the benefit of hearing the neighborhood and their input into this would at least settle it all, so when it does get voted out, we know we've heard from everybody, we've answered the questions as we can, and this thing can be put to bed for once and for all. So I'm asking for it to be recommitted to ZAP.
Any comments on this, Councilor Krinsman, and then Councilor Crossley?
Thank you, Madam President. I think my name was mentioned, so I get to respond. That's a joke. Is no one watching debates? Come on. I'm supportive of the motion. I just want to remind folks that there's no harm here in a delay because the petitioner was asked several times if there's anything that they're looking to do with the property now that they can't do or that they would be able to do under the new zoning that they're seeking, and they've said no, that there's no change in use of the building that they're seeking right now. So I see no harm in recommitting it to the committee and giving us a little bit more time to figure out exactly what's going on there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Crossley?
Thank you. I have no problem with postponing the item. I wanted to propose perhaps a friendly amendment So having your, sorry? Get closer to the mic, okay. I don't know when the community meeting is scheduled, if you're trying to get this done in any particular time period. We have a very full agenda in zoning and planning. And we voted this understanding that this is a site that's isolated from everything else, from neighborhoods. I mean, it's cut off by the commuter rail from the closest neighborhood, which is hundreds of feet away and uphill, and it's cut off by public land and parkland and so forth. And so what if you have your community meeting, you get the report from that, or we get the report from that. If there's nothing untoward going on, we could vote it at whatever council meeting is subsequent to that, that public meeting. If you find something, then, you know, certainly we can bring it back into committee. But the committee voted this understanding that no matter what happens there, it's going to be a special permit if something is going to happen there, unless the petitioner just wants to fill the buildings with a use that doesn't work because the buildings actually cross two zones. So it's very messy right now. What do you think about that? And you know, that way we might actually get it done more timely, unless you find something that we couldn't imagine as we discussed it twice in committee. Thanks.
I want to speak to the timing thing first of all. So my understanding from the petitioner's attorney is that they were willing to accommodate whatever timeline was necessary. So I don't know that there is like a sense of urgency that this has to happen next week or anything. I still feel, I think it should, I think there's enough potential for questions here. You know, and you may find, I mean, sometimes these things happen and very few people show up. You don't know. I think where Councilor Gentile was coming to this when he first chartered this, and what I've come to agree with, is that I think by opening it up and allowing it to be in committee, if anything does come up, those questions can be handled. You can take, I know you closed the public hearing, but you certainly could reopen it. I think it's just a clean way to say, this is the last call, let's get everybody on the table. My sense on this one is that, I shouldn't prejudge it, my sense on this one is that this will be settled, but I think this is just a good way to respond to the people who've raised the question and answer it. And I understand ZAP is, you know, very, very busy. Hopefully this doesn't take a lot of time back in committee. I think it should be worked out by the time it gets there. So I'd prefer to have it go back to committee, but we'll abide by the vote of my colleagues here.
Councilor Ryan.
Yes, thank you, Madam President. I'm one of the two people that abstained on ZAP on this. I agree with my colleagues from Ward 4. I'm a little upset with the process. I feel like we're going in reverse, that you know, the cart's before the horse, and we should have already had the public hearing. The neighbors need to have the public hearing, and you know, I fault the representative of the owner of the property for that. So I will be voting to send this back to committee.
Thanks. Just to clarify, it'll be a public meeting, not a public hearing, just to clarify. So is anybody else? So I guess we can vote. And the vote is, the request is to send it back to ZAP. And so if you vote yes, it goes back to ZAP.
Counselor Baker. Counselor Bowman.
Aye.
Counselor Crossley.
Aye.
Counselor Danberg.
Aye.
Counselor Downs.
Aye.
Counselor Gentile. Counselor Greenberg.
Aye.
Counselor Grossman.
Aye.
Counselor Humphrey.
Aye.
Counselor Kalis.
Aye.
Counselor Kelly.
Aye.
Counselor Krinsman.
Aye.
Counselor Laredo.
Aye.
Counselor Leary.
Aye.
Counselor Lipoff.
Aye.
Counselor Lucas.
Aye.
Counselor Maliki.
Aye.
Counselor Markowitz.
Aye.
Counselor Noel.
Aye.
Counselor Norton. Counselor Norton. Counselor Oliver.
Aye.
Counselor Ryan.
Aye.
Counselor Wright.
Aye.
President Albright.
Aye.
Motion carries 22 yeas, 0 nays, 2 absent.
Okay, thank you. The next item is 247-23. Counselor Krinsman.
Thank you, Madam President. This item was heard on Wednesday, August 16th, if I'm not mistaken. And it's item 247-23. This is a request to place a non-binding advisory question on the ballot. It was a request by a group of counselors seeking to place an advisory question on the November 7th ballot. The language is up there for you to see. It was, should the Newton City Council vote to adopt a zoning ordinance for Newton Village commercial centers so that parcels under 30,000 square feet would have the opportunity to be redeveloped to construct multifamily housing or a mix of businesses and multifamily housing in buildings up to 3.5 to 4.5 stories high without requiring on-site parking and prior approval from the City Council. There was a robust discussion in committee. Ultimately, the committee decided that it was not advisable to put this question on the ballot. The vote was 6-2 on a motion to deny that was made in committee. I'll leave that as the report and let people speak to it.
Thank you very much. Counselor Lucas, you put this on second call.
Thank you, President Albright, Chair Krinsman. Madam President, I would like to substitute the report from denial to approval.
Second.
Okay. Do we have to vote on that? Okay.
Cool.
Let's have a discussion on that item. So Counselor Lucas is moving to substitute approval for denial. So that would mean that it would be as if the committee approved having this ballot question on the ballot. Yes, but he's substituting. He wants to substitute approval for denial.
I would like to speak to the motion. I was
Please.
waiting for, yeah, okay. So, yeah, this is, this docket item was a continuation from Mr. Harrington's petition that Programs and Services heard in July, I believe. And the committee voted to deny. When it came to the full council, the council, again, voted to deny. I voted in favor of denial because after listening to my colleagues, they pointed out that there were issues with that particular petition. There were multiple questions. It was 4 questions in total. And there were, you could say, mistakes or misstatements in those particular questions. So what I did was I docketed my own advisory question and I cleaned up the language. It is before us right now, but as I said in Programs and Services, it captures the essence of what we're trying to do with village center zoning. We don't have it up right now, but it was eliminating parking requirements, lots under 30,000 square feet. That's a change from our current ordinance. Multifamily housing with a mix of business with multifamily housing or mixed use. And it would go into the commercial centers, which we know as village centers. And as I said in committee, this captures the essence of what we're trying to do here with village center zoning. I think advisory questions are a great way to receive feedback. It allows the voters to express their opinions, yes or no, up or down, if they want to essentially go forward with this. There were things that I did not mention in this particular question, and those particular things with village center zoning that have to do with train stations I think it was Councilor Krinsman or Humphrey, I don't remember who it was, but they asked me that in committee. Why did I not mention train stations? The reason is because not every train station area around every train station is being upzoned, is part of the Village Center Overlay District or the MBTA Community Housing Act. I believe it's 4 stations in total. So I also didn't mention the 8,330. That was the last thing I was thinking about adding to that, but I chose not to add that into this particular ballot question because we are rezoning other parcels, other village centers, which are not included in the 8,330 calculation. So I could have said 8,330, but there's other village centers. So I chose not to go in that direction. But I think that pretty much sums it up. Always interested in hearing what all my colleagues have to say. So that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there any discussion on this motion? Councilor Leary?
Thank you, Madam President. I think I made my thoughts known during the committee meeting, but the idea of legislating by ballot question, a very complex, detailed zoning reform plan in language like that, which if you don't put it in full context, it doesn't really mean that much unless you've really been following along with what the Zoning Planning Committee has been doing for several years now. We are elected to represent people to work in detail on these very difficult questions. And I think it's kind of dismissive of all the incredible work the Zoning and Planning Committee does. So I really, even though it's a non-binding advisory question, I don't think it's helpful. I don't think people learn anything from it. I think it's still confusing and difficult, and I will not support the motion.
Thank you. Councilor Baker.
Since I was one of the people in committee who opposed the decision of the committee, I just want to explain. This item, I think, has 2 benefits behind it. One is it's an educational one. I think everything in the item is accurate, and it represents what, in fact, may be the ultimate result of the zoning process. It's advisory only, but I think it's an important educational opportunity. I personally view it as a possibility also of maybe forestalling a referendum on the whole item. I agree with my colleague who's spoken eloquently about how much work has gone into that. I've been part of that conversation as she. We don't always agree, but I think the committee has worked very hard about it. But in terms of what this particular question represents, it is indeed what will be visible or the impacts in the villages of this particular outcome. And I think it's important to advise the public through this process. So I'm going to support the motion to substitute, but I understand the colleagues who feel otherwise, and that's why we had an extended discussion in committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Crossley?
Thank you, Madam President. Is this close enough? Okay. So I don't support the motion to switch to approval. I neither believe in government by referenda, particularly on complex issues, policy issues such as this. The question, by combining so many issues, just as it's written, how would I learn from somebody answering it yes or no? Maybe I answer it no because I agree with 2 items and I don't agree with the other 2 items. Maybe I answer it yes because I agree with 1 item that's more important to me than the other several items. But bottom line, I don't think it's possible to write a single question that accurately reflects the proposal that is currently before us, never mind the fact that it's changing as we speak, because every meeting we've had in August and every meeting we will have in the next couple of weeks is about entertaining amendments and refinements to the text and the maps. I don't think we should use ballot questions as though they are taking a survey. If we want to do a survey, take the survey. But actually, I think the 2.5+ year process we've been through, where we have over and over again invited the community, organized groups, individuals, boards and commissions, everybody, to come in and speak to us, and we have gone out to speak to them in, for example, the village meetings, or for example, at the very beginning when we had the community engagement, to understand what people are looking for, what they care about, and then as we've progressed over the 2.5 years, we've learned a lot from our community, and we have revised the zoning accordingly, with always an eye on evaluating how well we think the product is going to serve the goals and objectives we agreed upon, which, by the way, are not in here in this question. So you might say the ballot question should say, should we do this, this, and this in order to achieve X, Y, and Z? I don't think it's possible to write a question that truly reflects even the essence of what it is we're proposing. So I'll be voting against substitution.
Councilor Maliki.
Thank you. So, as I am one of the names on it, I'm obviously going to be supporting the substitution. I think it's, as has been mentioned, it represents the essence of the Village Center zoning proposal, which has remained unchanged. The 3 key elements that are included in this question, the 3.5 to 4.5 stories, the 30,000 square feet cutoff, and the no parking, they have all survived attempts to change and each of those in the committee. There's been no indication that a majority of the city council is not going to keep on supporting those things. So I think it's a fair representation of what is expected to pass. I think it's not legislating by referendum yet because it's not binding. It seems like people are afraid to hear what voters really think, even though at our previous meeting on the subject, some people said they would welcome an actual referendum. I hope that means there won't be any efforts to prevent people's signature gathering at Whole Foods this time around. The fact that you've got different elements, in this case only 3, rolled into one question, we're going to face the same type of situation voting on whatever we come up with, where there will be things in it that people might like or not like, and we'll have to vote on the whole package as a package deal. The fact that organized groups, boards and commissions all have been repeatedly solicited for opinions and produced them and showed up at meetings. We've seen people showing up at recent meetings who have just heard about it, and those of us who have been knocking on doors for various reasons, we're still finding many people. I mean, my last go around in West Newton, I'd say 50% of the people that I found home had not heard of Village Center zoning. So I think we need the context that people are so eager to provide. You can provide all the context you want during the discussion leading up to the what would be the November vote, and what people refer to as context, I think, is largely opinions, aspirations, hopes, and that is not something you would put in a ballot question that people are voting on. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Danberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For as long as I've been watching government, which is a while now, I think that I and lots of us have heard the comment from people who come out at the last minute after something has been discussed for weeks or months or years, as in the case of this zoning ordinance, to say that they knew nothing about it. This is the first time they've heard it. And it's because not everybody listens to what is put before them. Not everybody reads the newspapers, whatever papers. Of course, what we have now is only online. But I think that a lot of people choose to read the items that are discussed online. And I think that they've been discussed well. I think that the Zoning and Planning Committee and the city and the planning department have done a very good job of attempting to get this information out for the past 2 years. So I will not be supporting this item, and I also will not support this substitution.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Okay, is there anybody online? Nope. And I think we're ready to vote. So the motion is to substitute approval for denial.
Counselor Baker.
Aye.
Counselor Bowman.
No.
Counselor Crossley.
No.
Counselor Danberg.
No.
Counselor Downs.
No.
Counselor Gentile. Counselor Greenberg.
No.
Counselor Grossman.
No.
Counselor Humphrey.
No.
Counselor Kalis.
No.
Counselor Kelly.
No.
Counselor Krinsman.
No.
Counselor Laredo.
Aye.
Counselor Leary.
No.
Counselor Lipoff.
No.
Counselor Lucas.
Aye.
Counselor Maliki.
Aye.
Counselor Markowitz.
Aye.
Counselor Noel.
No.
Counselor Norton. Counselor Oliver.
Aye.
Counselor Ryan.
No.
Counselor Wright.
Aye.
President Albright.
No.
Motion fails. 15 nays, 7 yeas, 2 absent.
Okay, thank you. Now we're back to the main item, which was denial of the item. Is there anybody out that wants to speak to that? Okay, then we can vote. Oh, we have somebody? Councilor Markowitz?
Well, I know where this is going, but I just want to say this. The one thing that struck me about this, and I think there were very good comments made on both sides of this. I do, however, think that there is a way to write this. I mean, that can be understood, but to me, the biggest issue here is, despite the efforts of the committee and the planning department, which clearly have been significant, I agree that a lot of people don't know what this is, and I don't think the complexity of it is justification for saying that they can't or shouldn't be more explicitly reminded of this, and perhaps they'll do the work to actually inform themselves. Yes, it's complex, but it's non-binding, and I think it's a way to get the word out to the people of the city, and that's why I support it. Difficulties notwithstanding this, but I will support it being on the ballot in a non-binding way. Thank you.
So your vote, you'll be voting no? Yeah, okay. Is there anybody else that wants to speak? Anybody online? Okay.
No.
You just clarify so we're
Yes.
crystal clear what a yes and a no vote mean.
So, yes, so the motion, the recommendation from the Programs and Services Committee was to recommend denial by a 6-2 vote. So if you vote aye, you'll be agreeing with the denial. If you vote no, you'll be disagreeing with the denial.
Counselor Baker.
No.
Counselor Bowman.
Aye.
Counselor Crossley.
Aye.
Counselor Danberg.
Aye.
Counselor Downs. Counselor Gentile. Counselor Greenberg.
Aye.
Counselor Grossman.
Aye.
Counselor Humphrey.
Aye.
Counselor Kalis.
Aye.
Counselor Kelly.
Aye.
Counselor Krinsman.
Aye.
Counselor Laredo.
No.
Counselor Leary.
Aye.
Counselor Lipoff.
Aye.
Counselor Lucas.
No.
Counselor Maliki.
No.
Counselor Markowitz.
No.
Counselor Noel.
Aye.
Counselor Norton. Counselor Oliver.
No.
Counselor Ryan.
Aye.
Counselor Wright.
No.
President Albright.
Aye.
Motion carries 14 yeas, 7 nays, 3 absent.
Thank you very much. I just want to say that it is such a pleasure to see so many of us here tonight. It just feels like the family's back together again. So thank you all for coming tonight. And we had a motion to adjourn. Councilor Markowitz. Motion. Councilor Markowitz has moved adjournment. Have a good rest of the night, everyone.